Alrighty, so we've got the watercolor techniques that we want to begin. And so I've got right here copy paper, because some of you guys don't have watercolor paper and you have copy paper, which I love working on just plain old copy paper. It's okay. It's not the best stuff you ever saw, but it will work. And cold pressed watercolor paper has a little bit of a texture to it. I'm not sure that you can see that, but it's a little bit heavier. Many of you who got a mixed media sketchbook, like I asked, will have this kind of paper, and so that's what you're going to want to use. And so I've delineated wet and dry, and this is the cold press paper, copy paper, wet and dry, wet on wet wash, a graded wash, and a varied wash, and a graded wash, and a varied wash here too. Alright, so we're going to start with wet on dry. Now, what that means is basically you're taking a wet color, and I've made like a blue-violet here, a little bit of purple in there, a little blue-violet. And if you take that blue-violet and you just paint across the paper, this is basically wet paint on a dry surface. And what you'll get are some really nice heavy dark lines. So I'm trying to do. And then they'll not wash away easily. When they've done like this, something like this, and then you want to move it again, you're going to find it difficult to get it to move. You see how even when I get it wet, it doesn't want to leave that spot. You're going to end up with. So wet on dry means you're going to have very distinct lines left, and it's great for detail. So working from wet brush into a dry area is a lot better for detail. And even on this side, you're not going to get that paint to move that much. It'll move a little bit, but not by much. But so basically wet on dry means that your paints are going to be more precise when you lay them out. Now that also means that things won't move like you want, like a sky. This is not great for a sky. So if we want to do a sky, we're going to do what is called wet on wet. And that's where you just take your water. Now I've left my water a little dirty so you can kind of see it. And I just wet the paper. And then I just put the color into that water. And it'll go wherever I had water. It just travels. And a wet on wet will allow for you to get a really soft color down, and it will look pretty. All right, let's do wet on this side. Again, water on the actual paper. And then color into that water. Now, as you can see, I have a lot of water here. And the last time I talked to you about all these different ways of painting, I talked about lifting. So I'm going to play with some lifting here. Let's say I don't really want all of this, because this copy paper does have a tendency to wrinkle, because it's not going to absorb the water as much. So I can go back in here and lift. Basically what I'm doing is drying my brush and moving that color. But what's really nice about wet on wet is you can totally move it around a little bit while it's still wet, and you can really smooth out and make things look very even with the wrinkly paper. Notice I am dabbing it off on my paper towel over here. I'm soaking up water that I don't want on there. And over here, the watercolor paper is behaving strangely, but when it dries, what is happening is it's actually soaking through. So wherever it's soaking through deeper, it's actually creating more intense color. All right, so what we're going to go for here is a graded wash. Graded meaning dark to light. So I usually like to do any graded wash or varied wash. I usually like to do with a wet on wet. I'm going to try not to do too much water. I'm going to reduce the amount of water here. I think I'm going to pull some green into this. And just kind of change the color to a teal. So there's water here. I'm going to go with dark at the top. And just like we did before then when we were doing those little triangles where we were practicing how to get lighter and lighter, you basically go into the water, rake it, pull your color down, a lighter version of it. And with it wet on wet, it really does well for blending. And then again, I'm going in, raking off, and I'm just going to pull that last of that color down. So graded wash is going to go basically from dark to light. Now I feel like I need to go darker, and if you want to add more dark to it, you can go back up. I usually wait for it to dry a little more than that, but there's really that moment where if you wait too long, it's not gonna look good, and if you go too soon, I'll just leave that one. And a graded wash over here. So I'm going to go with a little bit of water and dark. Dip, rake, pull that color down. Dip, rake, and pull it down the last bit. And again, if I feel like I want to deepen that color at the top, I can totally add more back in there. With the watercolor paper, it doesn't wrinkle up as much, so that's helpful. Alright, and then we're going to do a varied wash. Now a varied wash is, again, wet on wet, so I'm going to put some water on here. Watercolor paper is acting strange. I'm going to go with the green. On one side. Cleaning my brush and grabbing some yellow. And then going on this side. What I'm going to allow them to do is bleed into one another. And this is a varied wash, so you have two colors not completely mixed up, but varying in their color. Going over here. Yellow. And again, wet on wet. It's going to give you a lot more movement. Allowing for the colors to blend together. So that's a varied wash. So graded, dark to light, or light to dark, varied, and again both of those are accomplished through wet on wet. And over here again, look, see how I have a whole puddle here? If you're unhappy with that kind of thing, all you have to do is lift it. Don't use a paper towel. Just go in there. Because see, I have control over it with this brush. I can easily pick up color right here. Let's say I want this little spot out. I can totally lift it up out of there with this brush. And I know exactly what I'm doing. I know exactly where I'm at. And I'm not actually causing any blotting going on. Okay. There you go. Have fun. Do wet on wet, wet on dry, graded wash, varied wash, and then just do maybe some playing with it and see if you can keep and work some kind of design. Draw something and just play and do all of these and incorporate them. And then go back after they've dried and wash back over them and see what happens. Thank you.